my name is Susan Bowerman. I'm a registered dietitian and Senior Director of Worldwide Nutrition and Education and Training here at Herbalife Nutrition, and I'm also Chair of the Herbalife Nutrition Dietetic Advisory Board. I'm so happy to be doing this training. It's a training I've been wanting to do for a while, where we're going to spend some time today talking about how to use our products in Herbalife recipes. One of the other things that I get asked about is what happens if I heat our products? Does that affect the nutritional value? So I want to assure you that the amount of protein in your recipe is not going to be affected if you heat it. So if you make a pancake or you make a waffle or you put Formula 1 or PPP in a recipe and you bake it, the protein is not going to be affected. What I usually remind people is that this is true for any protein food. So when you cook an egg, it goes from being raw and runny to being hard and solid, and its functional properties change, meaning that you can beat a raw egg with a fork, but you can't beat a cooked egg. And so it changes in terms of its function, and this is due to the structural nature of the protein that changes with heat, but it doesn't change the protein content. So you don't need to worry about that. So, and fiber, by the way, is also not altered by heat. However, there is the possibility that you lose some vitamin content when products are heated. Now, I want to say that this is true again for any products, and this is why I have a warm golden tonic chai up there, as well as some steamed veggies. So no matter when you heat vegetables or products, whatever it is, there is the possibility that you can lose small amounts of vitamins, certain vitamins. But remember that it's not just heat, it's exposure to air, it's how long you've cooked it, it's the way that you cook it. And again, this is true for any food. So when you buy vegetables in the grocery store and they've been sitting out in the air, there's possibly some vitamin loss that can happen. And then you go home and you steam it, you might have some vitamin loss. It's possible. However, what I usually like to point out is that it's really hard to quantify, number one, because there's so many variables, but that if you are eating a healthy diet, if it's well-rounded, if it's balanced, if you're consuming Herbalife nutrition products which are fortified, you are likely getting an abundance of vitamins. And so that any losses that might occur from heating products is going to be minimal and not really of any concern when you're eating a healthy, well-balanced diet. So yes, there might be some loss. Yes, it applies to all foods. No, it's not going to cause vitamin deficiency as long as you're eating a healthy, well-balanced diet. Okay, I also get asked about freezing. And so freezing doesn't have any effect on vitamin, mineral, protein, or fiber content. So you can freeze anything and you don't need to worry about it. The only thing with freezing, if you make, let's say if you make a popsicle or you make an ice cream type of product, is that sometimes when you freeze things and they get very cold, the flavors are diminished. You might taste your mixture before you freeze it and it tastes fine, and then you put it in the freezer and then you realize it's not as flavorful. So this is where you might want to use some toppings. So if you make like an ice cream like dessert, or if you make a popsicle, maybe you want to coat it with something so that when you take that first bite, maybe you get a little flavor of coconut, or you get some seeds, or you get a little bit of dried fruit. That way you can impact the flavor when you first take that first bite. The other thing to consider if you're going to make something frozen is consider the texture. So if you're making a popsicle, if you do just beauty drink and water, it's going to taste fine, but it's going to freeze as hard as an ice cube. So it's going to be very, very hard, which might be the texture you're after. Whereas if you make the pops I showed you a bit ago that have the yogurt in it, or it has some milk in it, that's going to freeze differently. The texture is going to be different. It's not going to be as hard as an ice cube. And so, or if you add fruit to it, different fruits are going to freeze differently. Mango, for example, doesn't really freeze very solid. So if you make a pop and you put some blended mango in there, you're going to have a really nice texture. So this is where it's fun to start experimenting. Now I want to talk a little bit about claims and food safety, particularly for those of you who have nutrition clubs, because there is some guidance that we want to give you. And this is, I mentioned before that if you make a recipe that looks like a dessert, it should be positioned as a dessert. And so just be sure that you identify your items appropriately, whether it's a meal, a snack, a side dish, or a dessert. Remember, as I said, that claims on the products only apply when it's made as directed, but you can make general statements. So if you add active fiber complex to a salad dressing, for example, you can say, my salad dressing has more fiber than most bottled salad dressings. That's perfectly fine. You can say that. What you don't want to do, by the way, is if you add an Herbalife nutrition product to a cake or a cookie and it's fairly high in calorie, we want to suggest that you don't say that it makes it better for you, because if it's a high calorie item, it doesn't necessarily mean it's necessarily good. So as I said, you can make general statements. You can say this cookie has more protein than the original cookie recipe it came from, or it has more fiber, or it has more vitamins and minerals because I added these products. So that's just some general advice. Now let's talk a little bit about food safety. This is important for those of you with nutrition clubs, because if you're preparing foods to serve to other people, the last thing you want to have happen is to have anyone get a foodborne illness. And the way that you ensure against this is to pay attention to temperature. It's the most important thing. So what we always say is that you want to keep your cold foods cold, which means 4 degrees or less. You want to keep your hot foods hot, 60 degrees or more. So when you're serving something and it's cold, it should stay cold. And if it's hot, it should stay hot. And by the way, I know that some of you have the ability to seal the top of a plastic cup with a shake in it. Just because it's sealed doesn't mean it can stay out indefinitely. Those temperature rules still apply. And we have what we call the 2-hour rule. And it's simple and it's easy, but it's really, really important. It says that foods can safely stay at room temperature for only 2 hours if your outside air temperature is below 32 degrees. If it's above 32, once your day starts to get warm, then it's only safe to stay out for 1 hour. And this includes the time it takes to consume the beverage. We're including the time it might take if it's being delivered or if somebody's waiting to pick it up. So really pay attention to that 2-hour rule. It's critically, critically important. Anything outside of that time frame, honestly, it should be discarded. All right, and then if you are making foods for takeaway, keep in mind you want to just comply with whatever the local regulations are for preparation and storage. You are allowed, of course, to sell individual servings of shake and tea. This is really how our nutrition clubs got started, but do remember the 2-hour rule. As I said, it's from the time it's prepared to the time it's likely to be consumed. And that's the most important thing to think about. If you're preparing something ahead and it might be taken out later, just be sure if it's something that's cold, you want to be sure and keep it refrigerated. As I mentioned before, if you are making products and if you want to position a shake recipe as something that is going to be fairly substantial, what we recommend is that you try to get about 170 calories and 17 grams of protein is a good target for a shake recipe that really can be more filling and more satisfying. And if you're preparing a recipe that you want to position as a snack, we recommend that you get at least 75 calories for a snack and somewhere between 5 and 10 grams of protein. And those little bits of protein throughout the day between your snacks, your shakes, and your meals are really going to help to keep hunger at bay. It also helps for those who are into sports. It's really going to help with muscle protein synthesis, having those little bits of protein throughout the day. The other thing I was asked to talk about very briefly is how do we estimate nutrition information in recipes? Now, for recipes that are pretty complicated, we certainly wouldn't expect you to do this, and you're not required to estimate nutrition information. But if you want to know how it's done, for simple recipes, it's pretty easy. You can use the nutrition facts panel on our Herbalife nutrition products. You can also go online. There are nutrient databases that are available where you can look up the other ingredients like your fruits or your vegetables or your nuts or your seeds. But remember that you want to consider your serving sizes. This is where I think people make the most mistakes. So for example, if you're creating a recipe and in your recipe you used 4 scoops of Formula 1, and you know that 2 scoops is a serving, whatever nutrition information you're using, you're going to have to double that because you've used 2 servings in your recipe. So just be sure that you make those calculations appropriately. So here's an example, going back to those frozen yogurt pops that I showed you before. The entire recipe used 2 scoops of Formula 1, and I'm just here calculating calories and protein for you. It used a 1/2 cup of milk. It used 5 ounces of yogurt and a 1/2 cup of berries. And you can see the Formula 1, obviously, I got that information from the label. The milk, the yogurt, and the berries, I got from an online database here. The total for my recipe is 300 calories. The total protein for my recipe is 28, but it made 4 pops. And so I have to divide all of those numbers by 4. So that comes out, that's how I came out with 75 calories and 7 grams of protein. Pretty simple. And again, you're not required to do this, but for those who want to, that's the way you do it. So that brings us to the end of our presentation, and I hope that this information has been valuable to you. I hope it's been helpful. As I said, I know that many of you in your clubs are looking for new recipes, and if you are, here's a source of inspiration, myherbalife.com. If you go to the resource center, if you don't spend a lot of time in the kitchen, these are some recipes that have been tested. We know they work. You can start with these. And then once you get more comfortable in the kitchen, hopefully you will make some other wonderful recipes of your own, and I'll look forward to seeing them. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope you found this inspiring. I'm sure you will. Enjoy the wonderful Herbalife nutrition products on their own or in these fantastic recipes. Thank you again.